Good morning. I'm Dr. Petra. Welcome to the Science of Mind class. I'm happy to see all of you in the room. I'm grateful for those of you who are with us online. And we are starting all over again. We talked about this briefly last week. We are starting all over again in the Science of Mind. We're at the beginning with the introduction that Ernest Holmes wrote to kind of give a little encapsulation of the teachings. And so after the introduction by Ken Gordon and the foreword by Jean Houston, we're in the beginning of the chapter, The Thing Itself. For those of you following along, it's page 25. I love this. Actually, the first page, these three paragraphs are some of my favorite writings in the entire book. I love the way that we get set up for a whole new ride and an entirely different adventure. We all look forward to the day when science and religion shall walk hand in hand through the visible to the invisible. So one of the things that I really love about the Science of Mind is that it is a reminder that it's only been 300-400 years that science and religion have split and turned their back on each other. And we have come to think of them as antagonistic. And yet science is really beginning to corroborate what people have known for literally thousands of years. And the coming together of those two things gives us an opportunity to not be superstitious about life, but to allow our spirituality to actually be very grounded, to have it not be emotional. It's not just about feeling better or working ourselves up into some sort of frenzy. It is about a clarity and pulling that clarity through the world religions, from all the way from indigenous religions to the 5,000-10,000 year history of religion in the world, through philosophy, through science, and also through the practices of psychology. And so the biggest piece here comes in the second sentence. Science knows nothing of opinion, but recognizes a government of laws whose principles are universal. And so this is part of what allows us to bring our spirituality into a deeply grounded perspective. If we recognize that the physical reality is a reflection of the larger intangible reality, well, we have laws, natural laws. You can look into nature and see all kinds of natural laws. And the recognition then is, well, if there are natural laws on the physical, this is a reflection of the fact that the universe itself, in its fullness, both visible and invisible, tangible and intangible, actually is run on laws. Principles that can be learned, they can be discovered, they can be used, they can be repeated by anybody. They can be used by anybody, just like a natural law. Once it's been discovered, doesn't matter what country you live in, it doesn't matter your socioeconomic system, it doesn't matter the color of your skin or the language that you use. If it's a law, it works everywhere by everybody in every situation. Right? That's what makes it a scientific law. It's repeatable, reproducible, and demonstratable. And so the idea is that one of the ways in which we remove sentimentality and this need to have blind faith, we remove that from our spirituality because we begin to recognize that there are, in fact, laws and principles that we can discover and use. So this idea that that there is something larger, that there is a larger reality, unless we've been taught out of it, trained out of it, most of us actually have a deep intuitive sense that this is true. Children know something that can be actually taught out of them. And so what we're seeking to do is to simply give recognizable language and a deep understanding to that which we already intuitively know. There is something more going on than just what we can see, hear, taste, touch, smell, measure in some way. There is something more going on. And so that's really the starting point. If you so will, the only leap of faith that is required in the science of mind is this idea that there is something more going on than just a mechanical, physical universe. That our consciousness and our ability to think, it's not the ghost in the machine, it's not just the product of our synapses firing, but that there is something there. We don't come in as a tabula rasa. We don't come in as a blank slate on which life writes itself, our environment, our family. Oh yeah, there's definitely some of that. But clearly, just look at your siblings. We all come in a little differently, right? All you have to do is look at the siblings in your household, and you know for a fact that we're not equally the same as just this blank slate coming in. And so these are the kinds of things that begin to point to there's actually something larger going on. We call that something larger spiritual. That's the language we've been taught, especially in the West. In the East, they would call that something larger consciousness or intelligence. And so if we marry those two things, right, we have spiritual intelligence or spiritual consciousness or something that is going on that is beyond just what we can see and feel and hear and measure, more than the facts. So then this next paragraph begins to embrace the idea of what about us? What about us? We are clearly in some way different than the animals and the plants. We're clearly some way different because no other animal or plant has made the mess that we have, right? And has built as many things and created and discovered and experienced. I mean, yes, there are certain animals that use tools, but they're, it's one and it's very simple, not the way in which a human sentient being can do. Now, is this the only place where that's happening? Who knows? Could be happening lots of other places in the galaxy. We happen to be a relatively, what shall we say, self-referential. We're really only interested in what's going on with us. And that's okay, because we actually have to figure that out. What is going on with us? So to suppose that the creative intelligence of the universe would create us in bondage and leave us bound would be to dishonor the creative power which we call God. To suppose that God would make us as individuals without leaving us to discover ourselves would be to suppose an impossibility. Individuality must be spontaneous. It can never be automatic. So what's trying to be said there, right? What's trying to be said there is the one thing that science is beginning to try to identify about what's different, right? You all know that we share 99% of the same DNA as chimpanzees, and even 78% of amoebas. We all share the same DNA, and yet clearly there's something else going on. And they've postulated a lot of things. One, people can be embarrassed. Well, they do actually now show that animals can be embarrassed too. People cry. Well, animals can cry too. People laugh. Well, animals can too. The thing that they are beginning to identify as so critical to what makes a sentient being different is the ability to imagine something that wasn't there before. Chairs didn't exist until somebody said, I'm tired of sitting on the log. First of all, I'm tired of sitting on the ground. So let's pull up a log. Wow, logs are good, but man, my back hurts. Let's put a back on this log. Oh, look, we just have a chair, right? Do you see? It's the ability to imagine something new that wasn't there before, and then to start working on it. That's what's being pointed to with this spontaneity. It's the ability to choose something that isn't, well, if for lack of a better word, automatic. If you look at a plant, it grows uniquely. Every plant is different than its, every rose bush looks different than every other rose bush. It has a different number of flowers. It has a different configuration. And yet it will always only grow roses, and it will grow them in a certain way. And it can't actually decide, wait, my soil isn't very good. You didn't know where to plant me. It can't pick up and move. Can't go someplace else and imagine being in different soil. And animals pretty much the same. For the most part, there is an automatic, we would call it instinctual way of being in the world that is governed by instinct and by then the learned behavior from their parents, their adults, the adults around them. We do something more than that. We are able to break out of the training that we've received in our families. We're able to think beyond something that we were taught in school. They call that innovation, inventions, right? Having a whole new idea about something, a whole new way of doing something. This is what's trying to be talked about in this idea that individuality is spontaneous. If it were automatic, then your life would be 100% scripted, just like an oak tree is going to grow. An acorn is going to grow into an oak tree. Every year it's going to produce acorns. It's going to drop its leaves, and it's just going to do that every year. Just the same, over and over and over and over again. Yes, the leaves might be a different color based on how much rain it gets, how cold it gets, right? But generally, do you see it runs on this sort of automatic generic instructions? This is what it means to be an oak tree. Whereas we can do a lot of different things that are new. Individuality must be spontaneous. It can never be automatic, or it isn't individual. Individual, like oak trees are all relatively the same, right? They're all basically oak trees. They all basically behave the same way. Lions are all basically the same. Yes, personality wise, and they, moderate differences in personality, but they're basically the same. And yet we can go to the moon. We can leave the planet and go to the moon. Individuality must be spontaneous. It can never be automatic, or it's not true individuality. The seed of freedom must be planted in the innermost being of humanity. But like the prodigal son, we must make the great discovery for ourselves. What is this great discovery? This is my favorite part. Here we go. Are you ready? This is my favorite part right here. We see abundance in the universe. We cannot count the grains of sand on a single beach. The earth contains untold riches, and the very air is vibrant with power. Why then are we weak, poor, and afraid? The science of mind deals with these questions. The divine plan is one of freedom. Bondage is not God ordained. Freedom is the birthright of every living soul. All instinctively feel this. The truth points to freedom under law. Thus, the inherent nature of humanity is forever seeking to express itself in terms of freedom. Okay, so this flies in the face of what most of us learned in our religious and spiritual training, right? That there's a destiny, that there's a divine plan, that there's a divine plan for you to have a life that that you have been somehow ordained. In the Eastern traditions, that destiny is based on karma. In the Western traditions, that destiny is based on birth, whether you've accepted Jesus as your savior, whether you're following the prophet Muhammad, whether you're living in the Jewish faith, whether you're living according to the laws. And these are all the outward expressions, or all the way outward ideas of how our lives have been ordained or destined. And the science of mind takes a radically different approach. And that approach is that you are free. Otherwise, you cannot be an actually spontaneous individual. Freedom under law. So in the entire rest of the book here, we are exploring those two things: freedom under the law. The freedom, which is the essential truth of who we are, to be ourselves, to choose, to decide, to make decisions, no matter how much of a mess we might make with those choices and decisions. And the universal law, which, as we said before, is as repeatable and reproducible and exacting as any other law. So freedom, the spontaneity, gets played out through this universal law, which provides outcomes and benefits and consequences for the freedom to choose that we have. Freedom under law. The divine plan is for each one of us to be free to what fundamentally? Discover ourselves, discover who and what we are, discover who and what is going on, to discover these universal laws and principles and our ability to use them, to discover for ourselves that we too are so much more than the physical body and the environment or experiences that we've had and the ways in which we've decided the world works based on those things. The divine plan is one of freedom. In the science of mind, that's the only divine plan we believe in, that we are completely free. We are free to make good choices, bad choices. We are free to align our lives with love. We are free to align our lives with hate. And all of that has consequences and outcomes that hopefully teach us something that we discover about how that works, how that plays out, whether or not that is in alignment with the kind of life we want to live, whether it's in alignment with what we believe to be true about this larger life, whether it's in alignment with what our heart and our intuition already knows, that we belong to each other, that love is always the answer, right? And there's always a good, ethical, integrous way of being in the world. And when we are not, we are free to choose not to do that. And the universal law plays that out. So, yeah. So let's see what you think about that. Where does that land for you? How does it feel to be that radically free? To be radically free. And, well, let's just say this, that the universe itself, that which is larger, does not have an opinion. Doesn't have an opinion about whether you're happy or not, doesn't have an opinion about whether you're a teacher or an accountant, doesn't have an opinion about whether you live here or there, get married or not, have children or not, who you love, how you live. It only reflects back through law the outcomes of the way in which we exercise our freedom, and gives us an opportunity to learn from that. So, yeah, so let's check in. What do you think about that? How does that feel? How does that land? Thoughts and questions that you have. So we're going to turn it over to Ryan. We're going to say good morning and good morning to everybody out there online. And Ryan, take it away.
Hello, and welcome everybody to the Science Mind class with Dr. Petra and myself, Ryan, the guy with the moist voice. So I'm glad to be back with you. I was gone last week, and I know Joseph was here helping. So shout out to Joseph. He will be helping me coming up here in October too, because I'm going to be out there living my best life.
Going to Europe.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm going to be trotting around. And unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but fortunately, Richard is out today. He's taking a vacation down south, smothering his body up with lube and oil on a beach somewhere. Hopefully, I don't know. He's probably in the hotel room eating tacos. But we have a lot of people here online all over the world. And so we want to say shout out to everybody who's watching us here on the Zoom room and on Facebook Live. And this is an engaging experience. So we're going to play a little game for the folks that are here in the room today. Are you guys ready for this game? I thought of it about 5 minutes ago.
We're ready.
Since the iconic Richard isn't here, for those who'd like to talk in the audience, just go ahead and raise your hand and then hold on to the microphone and wait till the next person and just please hand the microphone off. I'm one guy today, so if we could have your assistance in helping to pass the mic around, that would help everybody.
Perfect.
If you get the microphone, just say your name and what your question or comment is, and we can have Dr. Petra answer any of that. Do so by raising your hand. Can I see everybody raise their hand? Is your arms working today? All right, there you go. Now, for those who are watching us on the Zoom, we want you to do the same thing. We want you to engage and participate with us. And so there's a couple ways you can do that. If you hit the raise your hand icon located down below, which I see some people are already doing.
They're practicing too.
They're practicing as well, and I love it. You can hit that, and I'll bring you into the room. And for those who are here in Zoom and on Facebook Live, you can always put your questions and comments in the chat, and I like to keep those a secret. Just kidding. I'll say what the question is, but we love to keep it anonymous, so that way we can provide a safe container for spiritual growth. So I just want to poll the room. Does anybody here in the room want to ask a question or
make a comment?
All right.
Yeah.
We got two right here. So we'll start with you and then just pass it to Jerry when you're done.
So
do you want to say your name, Nicole?
my name's Nicole. Hello. When we say in the Science of Mind that it is not God's will for us to be in bondage, that this is God's will for us to be free, how do you respond to the human need and desire to bond one another in the ways that we set expectations for other people or attempts to conform to one another? In so many ways, civilization bonds itself. We do it to our children. We do it to our colleagues. It's how do you respond to that?
Well, I would say two things, Nicole. First of all, we freely go into those kinds of agreements. I wouldn't call them bondage. I would call them agreements, because we know that it makes our relationships work, right? So we stop at stop signs. We agree to stop at stop signs. We agree to stop at red lights, because it actually makes the flow of traffic work better and there are fewer accidents. And we recognize that when somebody disregards those agreements, it's not good. And tragedies can happen, right? So a lot of civilization is really simply people working out on this human plane. How do we make it work? How do we provide enough structure that we can create a container in which we can live comfortably together? I mean, basically that's what the 10 Commandments are. We all know that the 10 Commandments weren't made up in the Bible, right? They come from much older tradition in the Hammurabi Code, which was written on an obelisk in Mesopotamia. And basically it's, you know what messes up a city, what messes up a group of people? Well, if you steal from each other, makes a mess. Kill each other, makes a mess. Covet somebody else's partner, their wife, their property, it makes a mess. So don't do it. We want to be civilized. We want to be able to work together. So a lot of it really is the beginnings of our freely chosen ways of being together. Now, there are people who choose not to live in the group, and they get to do that. They're completely free. They become hermits, or they go live in the woods, or they remove themselves from the culture or from society, and they are completely free to do that. They just can't come back into society and run red lights, because it's still dangerous to do so. Now, the other kind of bondage that we do, that is needing people to be just like us, needing them to look and act like us, needing our children to stay within the fold so we don't lose them, right? All those ways in which we feel bound, or excluding people. We're us and that's them, and we don't like them, we just like us, right? All of that is the way in which we have freely worked together to protect ourselves, because we do not yet know, we haven't yet discovered the truth of who we are. And so we still have to make outward practices or ways of being in the world that we think will keep us safe, that we think will keep us secure, that we think will protect us, because we don't yet know who we are, which is spiritual beings having a human experience, and that it is actually the spiritual truth and the use of the spiritual laws that actually is the ultimate security and safety and protection. But we are awakening to that. We are growing into that. Humanity is awakening to that. And so that's a part of then the way in which the universal law reflects back to us. As we are awakening, we begin to see how excluding people actually is the antithesis of love. Excluding people actually makes it harder for civilization to, for lack of a better word, behave civilly to each other, right? And that's what it means to have freedom to behave in certain ways, and then to begin to grow and see and discover, maybe that isn't actually the way that we want to be together. Maybe that doesn't actually create the best lives for ourselves or the best world that we want to live in. And so that's what it means to discover ourselves, that we had to be left, we have not, that we are simply evolving into our greater awakening. And that's been the process over the last, 10,000-15,000 years, as humanity has self-identified as humanity and has begun to grow and evolve in consciousness. So so we are hopefully participating in that awakening, right? That's our job, is to participate in that awakening and to begin to question the ways in which we are bound that seem more either arbitrary or actually no longer provide the safety and security and protection that they originally did, when they originally became the ways in which people behave towards each other. So great question. Thanks, Nicole.
I'm Jerry, and hello. I think you started answering my question. I was concerned that, let's say, people may get morality from the 10 Commandments or the Hammurabi Code, but if they had only studied, let's say, New Thought, that doesn't have a list of rules to respect other people, I just wonder how much is that inborn, or how would people develop a sense of respect and morality for others if there was not a list of rules to follow?
That is a great question, Jerry. And the philosophers have been arguing about that for 5,000 years, at least in the West. They've been arguing about that. Is it nature? Is it nurture? Right? And we've come to understand the truth is it's both. Right? We do come innately into the world with some sense of things. And then, of course, it is the way in which we're taught. And a list of don'ts isn't the only way you can be taught morality and ethics. So one, you can be taught simply by your experience in the sandboxes in kindergarten. Really, you can realize that when you take a toy from somebody else playing in the sandbox, that they can either kick sand in your face, beat you up, or they can run away crying. And you really, as a child, do actually make decisions about life around that. You can decide to become a bully back. You can decide to run away crying yourself, or you can decide, wow, that's really not how I want to be with somebody else. And if you read the developmental psychologists, Erickson and Piaget and people like that, right? They talk about that is what's happening in the first 5 or 6 years of life. We are making those kinds of decisions. And some of them we make on our own, and some of them we make guided by the people around us, whether it's the children around us, the teachers around us, the parents around us, right? Then the other thing is to assume that only a list of don'ts is the way people get morality and ethics. Plato's contention is that all learning is just remembering, that we actually come in with our deepest spiritual truths, and that all we're doing throughout our lifetime is remembering what we forgot when we were born, remembering that love is the answer, remembering that there are ways to be together that are more powerful than others. And then again, we have the assumption that that ethics can only come from religion, a moral code that is written down, do's and don'ts. Well, people who are atheists and humanists would vociferously deny that it requires a religious code to tell you that you shouldn't steal. People who are humanists recognize that we are all human beings and that there is a way of behaving towards each other that is actually respectful and loving or not. And so this is why in the science of mind, right, we recognize that we all have the ability to learn and grow and discover these things. We all do it a little differently, whether we're brought up in a religious household, whether we're brought up in a culture that breeds hate or one that breeds love. We all get to see the outpicturing of those things, and we get to see how they play out. And it is ultimately, in the final analysis, always the reality of our experience which teaches us, which is why people leave the traditions they were raised in, go to traditions they weren't raised in, find other ways of organizing their own lives, because it is the playing out in experience that is the teacher. That is the universal law, right? It's the reflection back of how we've learned to identify and organize our lives, and we get to see it played out in our lives, and then we get to go, wow, do I really want to continue to believe that, think that, behave that way, act that way, those kinds of things. And so it's a great question. In the science of mind, we do not have a moral code, because we actually think that each human being is a spiritual being who is here to be the love and light that they are. And everything that stands in the way of that is what we get to explore, learn about, and find out about. We do have one ethical statement. That is, you can do anything, you can have anything, and you can be anything, as long as it doesn't harm anybody else. Now, can you always know the unintended consequences of everything that you do or choose? No, of course not, but you can do the best you can. And the more awake we become, the more aware we become of the way in which things play out over time. And the more we can seek to do the best we can, which also means that we don't psychologically overestimate the power of love. Many people take, well, if love is the answer, I'm just going to accept what everybody does. Which means then I'm a doormat, which turns us into a doormat. Sometimes love speaks fiercely. Sometimes love is a fierce no. I'm loving myself and you enough to say, no, this is unacceptable, right? So it doesn't just mean that everything's okay and always good and always fine. It means that we are as awake as we can be. We are as conscious as we can be. And we try to not intentionally, maliciously, or unintentionally, if at all possible, go around making messes. And when we do, we make amends, we clean it up. We try to learn from it, all of those kinds of things. And so that's the one statement that is, and fundamentally, it's not actually even a moral or ethical statement. It is simply a statement of truth. If we are all one, everything that I do, I am doing to the one, which means I'm also doing it to myself. There's something else, another way of organizing, right? Immanuel Kant called it the categorical imperative. Do no action that you wouldn't want to have universalized, that everybody would be doing it to everybody else. It's the philosophical version of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? But another way of understanding that is do no action that you would not want to be universalized and have everybody act that way, right? It's a powerful way of thinking about it. Could I make this into a universal law? Well, it's okay if I do it. It's okay if I pick that flower, even though you're not supposed to pick that flower. Great. Now we've made that a universal law. Everybody can pick that endangered flower. And how many billions of people are there? And that flower is not going to survive more than another year. It's going to all be picked. Do you see, right? It starts there and goes on from there. So that's a great question. And the other thing is the list of do's and don'ts. Also, let me just, because I have a granddaughter, the list of do's and don'ts is how we behave towards children. Right? Children need do's and don'ts. Why? Because they have no executive function yet. They can't actually parse out for themselves their own decision-making process. Actually, the truth is most of us can't do it until we're somewhere between 25 and 28. That's when our full executive functions fully come online, hopefully, right? Hopefully. And so up until that point, we actually need a lot of do's and don'ts because we can't actually make the decisions for ourselves in its totality, right? And so again, if humanity is awakening, if humanity is evolving and growing into understanding, discovering and understanding who we are, right? We are growing out of childhood. It's another way of thinking about it. We are growing out of childhood and no longer, in some cases, we don't need the list. It does feel as though in other cases, we do still need the list, right? But that's the point of spiritually awakening, of humanity spiritually awakening. Good, great questions. All right, do we have time for a question online, Ryan?
Yeah, I just want to give it a second here to pull our folks here in the Zoom room.
Comment, sharing.
Yeah, I do have one while we're waiting for somebody. This is from our favorite Bobby out there. Shout out to Bobby.
Shout out to Bobby.
The energy of the central point of the psyche is manifested in the almost irresistible compulsion and urge to become what one is.
Yes.
And that's by Carl Jung.
Yes. And I love that. Thank you. Can you want to read that again? Would you be willing to read
Sure.
that again?
It says the energy of the central point of the psyche is manifested in the almost irresistible compulsion and urge to become what one is.
Yes. Carl Jung. right? And the science mind would utterly agree with that, because what one is that individualized expression of the infinite. And I think in today's world, especially in the US and in first world countries, but especially in the US, right, we have so much anxiety and depression because our culture has devolved into this constant set of standards of the way you need to be, look, behave, act, whether you fit or not. And so many jobs are also not about being who you are. They are about being a cog in the machine of whatever, whatever machine we're a part of, whether it's fast food or corporate or whatever it is. There's an enormous amount of anxiety and depression because we aren't being who we are. We aren't being who we came here to be, which is a spontaneous, joy-filled individual. And it's challenging, but the science of mind would say that that is the essential truth of who we are. And it's the root of all addictions. When that doesn't get expressed, it turns inward, and it is so painful. I speak from personal experience that it has to be numbed, or we have to find a way to break out of those bounds, Nicole, that you were asking about, those sort of outerly imposed bounds, or the bounds that we impose upon ourselves. No one will accept me unless I am XYZ, right? And so then we put ourselves in that box, and then that box begins to close in. And and so we need a way to deal with that. Hopefully, practicing the science of mind helps us break out of the box, reframe what it means to be who we are, find ways to be in the world that really allow us to express this individualized being that we are in some joy-filled, spontaneous way that doesn't cause us to go around and decide that our spontaneity is to, go into schools and shoot children or whatever the horrible thing is, but to actually recognize that it is the expression of the deepest truth of who we are. So these are all great questions, and they're deeply important for us to contemplate and to find, if we are that free, we have to find a way in which we can learn about how to be free without harming others. And that also means without harming ourselves, right? Without doing violence or damage to our being, to our heart, to our soul, to our joy-filled expression. And so, so everything from here on out is trying to understand that, find ways to get a hold of it, practices that we can do that allow us to experience the larger reality, and really engage with it, discover it, use it, be a part of it, express it, and to do that in a way that is the light, that is the joy, that is the creative expression of it. And it can be very scary to be that free. What if there isn't anybody telling you what to do? Yes, you can do this. No, you can't. What does that mean? That means I now have to take responsibility for that myself. And isn't that part of what the whole issue of adulting is today? Sorry, that word just cracks me up, right? I'm adulting. I don't know this adulting thing, right? I find that fascinating because we are going to grow and become adults. And one of the things that that it means to be an adult is we have to make hard decisions. We take responsibility for our decisions and choices. We take responsibility for our own lives, and we have to practice working at it, right? That's what all of that means, to mature. And so we are maturing spiritually. We are maturing. Science of mind is a grown-up spirituality, and it helps mature us into that freedom to choose and the ability to be so free that we can actually be ourselves. So I invite you to the celebration here in 30 minutes. Reverend Karen has a fabulous talk, and she's going to actually be talking about exactly this. So, and how she is experiencing it in her own life and the ways in which we can all experience it some more. So I invite you to that. We have lots of classes coming up in the month of October, all kinds of things. We've got workshops coming up, home study groups you can sign up for, all kinds of things going on. So don't miss out. Come be part of the community. We're so grateful to be in community with you. We'll see you next week. Bye for now.